Hello and welcome everybody to the Women's Sustainability online session today, talking about the language and behaviours of inclusion, how not to sabotage progress and alienate our allies, which feels incredibly apt at the moment, given the amount of news articles I've seen about people believing that women's rights has been overdone and men are being really discriminated against. You may have seen those kind of articles in The Guardian and online as well. But joining us today are two fantastic people. We have Mark Freed, who is the CEO for Men for Inclusion. Hello, Mark. And we have Noora Friaq, always muted, fantastic, who is the Deputy CEO of Climate Outreach. Hello, Noora. So today is going to be a slightly different session from how we normally run things. This is going to be more of a conversation. Mark has got some information to share with us on some slides, but mainly it's going to be a conversation. So to kick us off, I'm going to invite Noora first to just briefly introduce herself and her role at Climate Outreach. Over to you, Noora.
Thank you, Rhian, and thank you everybody for being here. It's lovely to be here. My name is Noora. I grew up in the Maldives and Sri Lanka. I hold dual nationality and I now live in UK, and I work for Climate Outreach. Climate Outreach is about rewriting the climate story. And what do we mean by that? We mean that we want everybody to be involved in shaping the way we want to live in the world and how we tackle climate change. We know that most people in the UK care about climate, but we also know that everybody is not involved in the climate conversation. So we are all about changing that. We're all about making this conversation more inclusive and more nuanced, and rewriting the story from fear to hope and progress, where everybody has a say in how we proceed. And we're a social science led organization. I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Noora. Mark.
Thank you, and welcome. Lovely to be here, and thank you for the invite, Rhian, and look forward to this conversation. I spent the last 25 years after putting my career on hold at Credit Suisse, supporting and helping and championing gender equality within financial services. And about 4 years ago, like today, I got fed up with being the only man in the room. Welcome, Ron. I see you're on the call, so it's good to not be the only man in the room today. I recognise this is a Women in Sustainability group, so maybe that's not unusual. But when we're talking about DE&I, my belief is we're not going to get to the type of world that we want to unless we get there all together, hand in hand. So set up the organization called Men for Inclusion 4 years ago to engage the unengaged in DE&I initiatives.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Okay, so I think what we're seeing, I think what I've been seeing, there's a King's Fund research that came out recently. Those of you who follow us on LinkedIn, you will see that we were reporting on that, which was saying that just under half of Britons think that women's rights have gone too far, and that men are feeling really, really discriminated against. And yet when you look at sort of other statistics, which talks about, I don't know, women in holding senior managerial roles, only about 30% are women worldwide. We look at progress against those kind of stats that the UN gives out and so on. We're not there yet. We're very far from it, in fact. So why have we got this disparity? And why particularly have we getting this feedback from the younger generations that really are starting to think, particularly the young men, that they are being penalized, that this, it has gone too far. So I'm just going to go back to Noora, and I've thought we'd warm up the conversation by asking each one of our guests today to sort of share their headline takeaway for you. So if there's one thing that they really want you to think about or take away from the conversation, what is it? So Noora, would you like to go first? What is this sort of like your opener of what the current state of play is?
Thank you. I've been doing DEI work for a couple of years now, and I've had I have a good experience with it. I've had moments of tears and a real moment of sadness and doubt, self-doubt as well. And through that work, I would say my biggest learning is to know that we are always learning. And it's not, a static thing. It's really nuanced, and it's a journey, and it's not a destination we reach. That doesn't mean that, we can't imagine and we can't get to a place of equality. We can't hold that. If we arrive there, and if we stop doing the work, if we stop learning, then we're going to make sort of, setback. So my biggest takeaway, and I would love everybody to take away from today, is that this is a nuanced conversation. This is an emotional conversation. This is a journey.
Lovely. Thanks, Noora. And as you listen to our lovely speakers now and listen to Mark, do start to think about your questions and put it in the chat so we can weave that into our conversation. So Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Rhian. I think my first question, it would be a question out to our audience here, is diversity divisive? Does it pit us one against the other, men against women? If we're talking about diversity and the representation of women, have our solutions to that been based on fixing the women and blaming the men? And is that why we are at the stage we are, where we're accelerating so slowly that it's going to be long after I'm 6 foot under before we even get to the point where we're anywhere near reaching equality? Is if diversity is divisive, is the fact that we're leaving men out of the conversation or blaming them part of the root cause?
Really, thank you for that, Mark. Yep. So I've started to get some comments, which is fantastic. I like this one from Emily. It shouldn't be divisive, just like they say, it's not pie, more for someone doesn't mean less for you. And this is what I'm seeing actually online a bit more. It needs to be not just but this and it can be better, and it serves men, etc., etc. So let's just think about why this matters. We probably all got our own interpretation of why this all matters, the whole diversity, equality, and inclusion agenda completely. But I'd love your perspectives on it, and everybody listening in and watching. Why does it matter to you? So put your why in the chat, and we'll go back to let's go to Mark, and then we'll go to Noora. Why does this matter?
I think speaking, and Emily, I totally agree with you. So this is a win-win, and that's why it matters. I think when we ask men what type of world they want to live in, what type of workplaces they want to work in, what type of men they want to be, what type of fathers they want to be, what type of husbands they want to be, there's a huge amount of intersectionality. And convincing people and showing people that this is a win-win is really, really important. And unfortunately, all the statistics are showing that our current strategies for DE and I, which are mostly based on D, are alienating a significant proportion of the population. They're not engaging them. And even recent statistics are showing that even women are beginning to feel that this is wrong and discriminatory and not helpful. So I do really passionately believe we need to change the narrative to an all of us narrative, to an inclusion narrative and an equality narrative, not forgetting diversity, but we've focused too much on it in the past. We've focused too much on counting women, counting people from different ethnic backgrounds. And frankly, if you look at gender pay gap stats that have just been released again, nothing is moving. Yeah. if you look at what firms say they're doing, it's all about recruitment, leadership policies, blaming men. No one or very few firms are prioritizing the E and the I. And I think when we start prioritizing E and I and recognize that this is an all of us discussion, then we will start progressing much quicker, accelerating on our journey with a full bus rather than a half full bus.
Yeah, thank you for Mark. That has certainly triggered a few questions from me, but I'm going to hold on to them for a moment. And you're certainly getting some thoughts and some questions coming in at the chat, which is good to see. So, Noora, over to you. Why does this matter?
Thank you. I think for me, it's a very human need thing. We all want to be happy. We all want to be thriving. We all want to be, able to support each other. And, who wants to be sad at work? For me, it's as simple as that. And who wants to be the person who makes somebody else sad? That's not, like, I know people do things, but, it's not our first choice, right? I'm going to go get up and go to work and make people unhappy. So for me, it's really as simple as that. It's about us being happy and making each other happy, and having that, well-being aspect of it as well. I've held HR functions for a number of years. I've seen where DEI issues has surfaced and spilled at work and spilled over to many people's lives and families, seen divorce, seen suicide attempts and really unhealthy situations. And why would anybody in the right mind want to uphold that? That's it. And I would say, in terms of the DEI initiatives and things, why is this divisive? I would say it's because we're having a very binary conversation. We're not having a nuanced conversation. And, I would go to the DEI, the DEs and Is that Mark referred to, I'd say we need to change the E from equality to equity. We are all equal in our rights. We are all equal in terms of our rights and in terms of our value. But that doesn't mean I can lift the same heavy thing as my husband can. And that's a recognition I'm unashamed to admit, and I'm okay with it. But at the same time, because of my unique is every single being is very unique. Everybody has. I also bring something unique that my husband can't bring. Yeah. And it's the same within my sort of, organizational settings. So it's divisive because we are having a divisive conversation. So I agree with Mark, we need to change the narrative. And we need to stop pitting men and women against each other. We need to recognize that some men also need feminine ways of working at work. It's harming men as well. And just because some people just because you're a female doesn't mean that you don't have anything masculine about it. It's not binary, and that's the nuance that we need to understand. And then the intersectionality. What about people? When we look at gender, just in that binary sense, we're not actually seeing and humanizing people as they are. We're actually reducing people to stats. I don't want to be a stat as a woman in my organization. I am me. I want to be wholly seen. My lived experience matters. My race matters. Compared to my colleagues and compared to me, we have very different set of circumstances. We complement each other, we can hold each other, and we can walk to the sunset together. But if you're not seeing that, we won't know how to do it. So I think we need to see each other better, and we need to hear each other better. And Rhian, in terms of that survey results, the research publication, what I would say is, that's the danger in having this conversation in abstract form, because it reduces us to stats. And it just makes me really wonder and makes me feel like we're not hearing each other. We need to do deep listening. I agree with Mark, it's not about filling quotas. It's not about recruiting and getting people of a certain color or background. It's actually about breaking the systems and breaking the structures that exclude people. Break those barriers and then people will come. But if you bring those people, I've been in situations where I've been hired because I'm a diverse person of color, but I'm not given a mandate to do anything. And what does that mean?
Yeah, yeah. Really interesting, Noora. I mean, one thing I've often reflected on in my little booth here needs this is the trouble of being in a booth. There we go, excuse me, little hand exercise there. Thinks I've gone. One of the things I've often come across is and thinking about the legacy of being in our colonialist patriarchal society, which some people believe that patriarchy is a predestined, that we're all predestined to live in a patriarchy, and when in fact there's some really, really thriving cultures in the world that are not. It's only been around for a little while. It hasn't always been here. So we need to hang on to that. But one of the things, and you mentioned about feminine qualities, masculine qualities, it's this fact from where I'm sitting is I can see that those feminine qualities in men and women have not been valued. And it's been the this focus on the masculine qualities, which then has perhaps led to this binary conversation and men having to buy into this the masculine quality of that and the feminine not being left with much, everything being devalued around the feminine. So before we go into some more questions, I'd love your response on that, because that's cultural. This is deep systemic stuff. And sometimes I think that's the thing that feels perhaps overwhelming, because that's what it's not we're fighting it, but that's what we're working in. So to you, Mark, and then Noora again.
Yeah, I've got a couple of real life examples of that as part of our workshops that we deliver. We quite often get to a section where we're talking about how the society that we live in and the inputs we've had affect us when we're growing up. So, what was it like to be a girl, and what was it like to be a boy? It's really interesting how when we get in a room of men who are happy to share, how they can quite often get quite emotional about the fact that they weren't the fastest runner, they weren't the best footballer, that actually, they've never liked golf, they don't like warm beer, that actually they enjoy cooking, and they want to be a different type of father. They want to be, and I think giving men the space and permission to talk about these things is a really important part of the process. And we've had we've had grown men in tears during those workshops, which I think is really important. My other example is we were doing some work with the board of a very large PLC, who are at the forefront, or position themselves as being at the forefront of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we went around this board and asked everybody where they were on their journey. What DE&I meant to them, and it was one of those difficult conversations where nobody was opening up. And then one of the men put his hand up and he said, "I've got a confession to make. I'm never in work early on a Wednesday. It's because I do the school run." Okay. And yeah, so there's part of us which will laugh at that. Well, most of the people in the room today will do the school run every day and have to juggle all of that. But here was a man who was sitting on a board, and that board had not been able to have or give themselves permission to have those type of conversations. But an hour later, we got onto paternity leave, and this firm have got one of the best paternity leave policies in the country, and nobody's taking it up, or very few people are taking it up. And we went full circle and we said, if you can't even admit that you love doing the school run, and that's a really highlight of your week to people in your workplace, what kind of role model are you? Yeah. What kind of, you're not giving people permission. You're not setting examples. And I think part of this is is actually over the last few decades, we've had some wonderful, amazing female role models that are standing up and showing how you can break into what were traditionally male roles and patriarchies and become CEOs and astronauts and inventors of vaccines. We need more men to be doing the opposite. And one of the comments in the chat there was about this very subject, about flexible and agile working. Yeah, flexible and agile working. Whenever anybody talks about it, it's always from the female perspective, which I get, I understand. But if we're going to engage all of men, we've got to give men the permission to do it as well. It's got to be all of us. It's got to be men want to go to the school gates as well, because so many men I talk to want to.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and I've got some reflections here about, policy is one thing, but that workplace culture being something entirely something else. And I never forget, actually, years ago, being in a big accountancy firm in London, in their big offices for a big women's sustainability event, and having, slightly unrelatable women talking about their careers. And she asked, they've all got nannies and things like that, which is fine if you've got a nanny, not against nannies, but a lot of people in that room couldn't relate then to the juggle she was talking about. But they did say, and how many people here are taking their paternity leave, and nobody put their hands up. And I heard a comment behind me, well, I wouldn't do that, that's career suicide. And the room just heard it, and just desperate. People felt quite desperate. Noora, anything to add and contribute here to what I just shared about qualities?
Yeah, I think I had a colonial education, so I had to do a lot of work to actually be able to understand it. And I would still say I'm still work in progress in many ways. So we are all shaped by our experiences in the world and what we are exposed to and the stories we hear. And I don't dispute that at all, and I agree to that. But I think there is also something about our principles. There's something about our identity. You're good, you're bad, you're a hero, you're amazing, all of that, if you have certain qualities and if you abide by a certain code or principles. And I think that has helped in many ways to progress, but it kind of helps. It doesn't help it further. It takes you to a certain point and it kind of freezes at that point because you faced a wall, you've done everything. Now, a good example would be, so when I in an organization, I really wanted to diversify, and I wanted to have intersectional women in this organization because climate affects women and young girls disproportionately and are projected to affect women and young girls more than men. So if we are to put people at the heart, especially most affected, it was really important to have women in climate outreach. And I wanted the intersectional element of it, the nuanced elements of gender, race and class background and education background and so on and so on. And every time I do a recruitment run, we're getting people of color, that's great. We're getting younger women as well, that's great. But they all kind of look like me and from the same region and ties as me. And I'm like, okay, but at the same time, everybody's celebrating because, we're diversifying, we're hitting the numbers, and Team Picture looks more diverse than our peer organizations, and we're doing better than the sector. But I really had to go and do deep learning and inner work on, what are my own biases? Why am I not able to break the barriers of entry for the organization for people from certain communities and from certain racial backgrounds? And that was really uncomfortable, and really had to face the fact that, okay, maybe what I have learned in my entire life and the way I see the world is not right. And it's not an easy thing to do. But unless we are willing, it's great to say we are all shaped, and we are all shaped. But I think we need to go further and do the work on an individual level before we even think about talking at an organizational level. Mm-hmm. And both can go hand in hand. But first, we have to commit to going through our inner journey.
Yeah.
It always starts with I, and then we need to move to we.
Yeah. So true, Noora, so true. And you're getting a lot of sort of absolutely in the chat there. So shall we go there? Because I'm obviously, being a coach, I'm very fascinated by this angle, because it does start inside, and we've got some interesting developments with the inner development goal framework, which we use inside Women's Sustainability as one of our underpinnings for the trainings and the workshops that we do, and the things we talk about, which very much is embracing, let's work on ourselves first. But could you both talk a little bit to that? Like, what are the things we should be doing first for ourselves? Because it is about being uncomfortable, but is there a way in that's helpful? So Mark, perhaps to you, and then again to...
Sorry, Rhian, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's about doing this. If we can't, Noora was saying we can't, with the work that we're doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, actually we have to do the inner journey first for ourselves, like to understand our biases, how we're approaching it.
Yeah.
And I know you spoke already about some of that, the group work you've been doing with the men that you're working with, the senior leaders. But for yourself, how do you think that's a journey that you started? I know it's very nuanced, but that way in first,
Okay.
how do we do it?
I think from a personal perspective, and we repeat this type of thing when we're with our workshops. Why am I passionate about this, and what is it about me that's made me passionate about it? The first thing is, I may look and sound like an educated middle-class man. In fact, I'm not. I'm dyslexic, severely dyslexic. I went to a school in the 1970s that taught by teachers writing on blackboards and pupils copying into textbooks. I couldn't learn like that. I couldn't write quick enough. School, an uninclusive education system let me down. I was brought up in a working class family home where both my parents worked. My mum was a true inspiration to me, but also my dad was an inspiration for me, because I was just as likely to see him doing the cooking, the ironing, and the shopping, and looking after me and caring for me as my mum was, and my mum did. So I was quite surprised when I got my first job as a postroom boy in a local manufacturing company, to find that when I walked around the offices, there were offices full of women, the typing pool and the switchboard normally, and there were offices full of men. And then there was a floor for management. Yeah, and as the postroom boy, I was allowed to climb those stairs through the double doors into this world, which was completely different from any world that I'd ever seen before. And I quickly decided, as a smart guy, that if I was going to succeed, I needed to start adopting, speaking like these people, adopting their behaviors and adopting their values. And 25 years later, I was running a technology company that was owned by Credit Suisse, where I met a wonderful woman who's now my wife and partner in E2W, who, one of the first things she said about me is, Mark, why have you got two personas? Why is there this work Mark and this home Mark? And that got me thinking that actually, for the greater part of my working career, I hadn't brought myself to work. We then, our work finished at Credit Suisse on the same day, because we sold the company that we were working for, and decided that we were going to be the type of parents, the type of partners, and the type of husband and wife that we wanted to be, and hence setting up this other business called E2W. Now, that story isn't unusual, and when we engage men, we have these conversations. We forget about business cases, yeah, and get straight down to the personal case. And most men will identify and engage on the top three. One, they identify with personal characteristics themselves. So they've been othered, they've been the only one in the room. You know, that could be that they support Chelsea and everybody else on the bus supported Manchester United. Yeah. But clearly deeper things than that. They've been inspired by wives, mothers, daughters, girlfriends, sisters, people that they've worked with who they've seen the barriers that they've faced, yeah, or they want to clear the path for the next generation. But greatly, if they don't identify with any of those, it is that actually this world we want to move into, as somebody said right at the very beginning, is good for men as well.
Yeah.
And my thoughts are that men are 15 to 20 years behind women in freeing themselves from outdated stereotypes. Yeah. And it's until we free ourselves from those outdated stereotypes and stop having to comply with them, and we get to an all of us narrative, that actually I can choose to be the type of father, the type of husband. I can choose who I want to be and where I want to be. That's going to make me healthier. It's going to make me better. It's going to help me in my personal development and my career development. Until we start talking to men about those subjects, rather than you're biased and you're only doing this for that reason, or don't say that, then we're not going to engage them.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a couple of threads, you know, very much from the pair of you: personalization, remembering our humanity, that you know, we actually just got to step into that space where we're acknowledging actually that intersectionality that all of us have. And it can be sometimes a difficult word for some people. I know it's similar. Well, for me, I also used to think, oh, well, I'm a white woman. I went to Oxford University. I'm a comprehensive educated girl, so I'm not from a sort of wealthy background. But you know, I'd always say, well, that's not for me. I can't. Intersectionality is difficult. And then I realized that actually I was othered because I'm Welsh. In the early 80s, being Welsh, you got really Welsh bashed. You know, you were absolutely Welsh bashed. And so and then that started my journey to realize actually I can engage with this, because yes, there's some aspects of privilege, but there's also some aspects where I can relate to the people and understand. And I've got to get over myself, you know, in terms to understand the language and the behaviors that I can adopt and develop in myself. So we're going to move on to that specifically in a minute. But Noora, thinking about qualities, humanizing. I mean, you also said this, I thought, don't want to lose it, but being a way in. So like talking about healthy workplaces, I know we've had a comment, how do we start this? How do where's an inclusive way to talk about it where it can be and all of us rather than us v them? Anything you'd like to share or add there?
Yeah, I love this question. I probably give a different answer every couple of months, mainly because, you know, I'm learning.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's the first thing to start, that this is learning. It might be for a personal reason or for one or the other that, you know, one of the issues such as gender is far more important to you personally, or, you know, able-bodied and disabled body, or, you know, all of this. But I think it's important when you start the inner work not to see it in different boxes, see it as, you know, something that's kind of, you know, wraps around together, and see the system we live in. Is it patriarchal? Is it able-bodied? Is it cisgender based? Is it, you know, gives white privilege? And think about it from an analytical perspective of what is the system that we live in. That's the first thing I would say. Start from the system, understanding the system, and understanding that, you know, what are the privileges that the system offers you personally or by association. So for me, you know, for most part of my first, you know, 10 years in the UK, it was very challenging because I am a person of color, a woman, and I don't have the sort of white privilege. When I go to an interview, I have to make extra effort to dress and spend the money I don't have because of the biases. Mark, I completely relate to the, we don't always bring our whole self when we start in our journey. I want to make sure my English and pronunciation is, good enough. That's what I worry about, certain things. And, am I appearing too foreign? And then somebody will be like, oh, Maldives, very exotic. And then, I've got to make sure that I, measure that in a way that I don't react. So understanding the system and understanding what that affords to you and the disadvantages it affords to you is good. When I got married to my husband, who's white and French and working class, it gave me a sort of white privilege that I didn't know I would ever be able to attain, and I didn't really understand what it was until I got it. Really, in a way, by association, I would say I've acquired that. So understanding that, and then the other thing I think is when we do the inner work is be willing to be actually sad and uncomfortable. We put so much priority on making sure that the conversation we have is a safe conversation, and we should always be aiming for it. But I've learned that giving 100% safe spaces is not something I can guarantee to people when holding these circles. But what I can guarantee is a brave space. Now, what does that mean? That means that nobody can be, aggressive or awful or harmful, but you might end up in tears, and you might get really, really uncomfortable and fragile and vulnerable, and you might not agree with somebody in that moment. You can put ways of managing that space to be not harmful, but I can't guarantee it will definitely be no tears and emotions and tensions. So being brave, being able to be brave and sit with the discomfort. And then the third thing I would say when doing the inner personal work is asking ourselves, who could I lift? Who could I lift? Now, there was a point when I was, when you look at me, I'm non-British and I'm a person of color, and I'm sort of, the only person in the room, generally younger than the average age in that space as well. And now I'm looking always to lift that person in the room because I can, share and offer that safety. So when we think about safe and brave spaces, there's also the question of who can I lift in that space? So those are the three things that I would say is the most important when it comes to starting the inner journey. Yeah. And from the well-being, Rhian, I would say we need to look at DEI not as this special team that and a separate role that needs to exist in the structure. There are reasons why we should start from that point, but that should be based on an assessment of where an organization is at. If it's the right choice to start it as a DEI role, a DEI department, great. But it should be really at the core of human resource management. And that should be at the core of well-being management. If an organization prioritizes well-being and developing people and creating a culture that's thriving in the most pure and most in the sort of, with genuine intention and action, and if you really look at the people in the organization, and if you want to make the space a good well-being environment for people, there is no way you can miss the boat on making it great for the people of color, for mothers, for people in menopause. So there are many different lenses to look at it. It's not just an abstract thing. That's where the well-being comes into play.
Yeah. Absolutely, Noora, and it just reminds me of how we just sort of bought into this mechanistic, reductionist approach, isn't it? We just want to simplify things all the time, and that's what we've been sitting in. This is the systemic stuff we've been sitting in, and yet it doesn't allow us then to have this kind of awareness and then these kind of results, because it is all nuanced. Mark and Noora, I think sort of let's think about, we've already started to go there in terms of the solutions, sort of how do we create the kind of behaviors and languages. But I know that, because I'm going to ask the question that probably people want to ask, or they're not going to ask, is what shouldn't we do? Like, what is the thing that really really is a killer for this. So, you know, the behaviors of the language, which you can see shuts it all down. We've touched upon it, but let's just be really explicit. You know, the sort of that should be straight away, just don't go there. That doesn't help. And obviously being very mindful myself, you know, being a founder of a women's network, you know, I don't get challenged so much now, but when I first started, it was, why are you doing this? And I always used to say, well, it's because we have different conversations when it's just women in the room. They're not better or worse, they are just different. And I'm holding that space for difference. So that's how I'd always, and I still talk about it like that. But what shouldn't we do, Mark? What's the absolute killer for this progress?
I think the killer is thinking that DE and I are all the same thing.
Right.
And I'll come back. I think I talked about diversity as being divisive. I think diversity and the solutions that people put in place for diversity are typically, you know, policies, procedures, HR, and very few of us have a daily opportunity to increase diversity. Yeah. We don't hire every day, we don't promote every day, but if we think about the I, about inclusion, yeah, it's something that all of us are responsible for every second of every day. Yeah. And I think that the big challenge and the big problem, if you like, and the don't is to put them all together. Yeah. We need to separate them out. We need to think about diversity, yes, but inclusion is all of our responsibility. Yeah. It's setting the culture, setting the behaviors, setting the values. Yeah. And Noora, you talk very passionately then, you know, about your own background and what have you. So I don't want to know you as the woman that came here from Mauritius, the woman of color, who I think is really important that I get to know you as Noora, yeah, and you get to know me as Mark, that I get to know your strengths, your weaknesses, your aspirations, your desires, what makes you tick, what doesn't make you tick, rather than putting you in a bunch of diversity boxes. And so I think that's really important. I think the other thing is some of the language we use, and Noora, so I'm going to pick you up because you used it. This you know, thinking about people who don't have your characteristics and calling them privileged, I think makes those people sit back and think. First thing they say is, "I'm not privileged." Yeah. As a white male, I may be the most privileged person on this call. Yeah. But as soon as you call me privileged, Rhian, I think you had an education. I think of all the reasons. So I think we should use and make sure we think very carefully about the languages we use and the language we use, because I've got relative advantage in some places, and I'd prefer to use relative advantage than privilege in some of the language we use.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember you mentioned this one of our first conversations, and it really struck home that straight away, my relative advantage in, you know,
Yeah.
and in some aspects I don't have a relative advantage, but perhaps other people do. And we have, if we take the time, as you were saying, taking the time to really see and listen and hear, you know, hear the person in front of us, we can then see and connect to that.
Yeah.
Before I go to Noora, is there another word you'd love us to stop using? Not me personally, but is there another word that you hear that you think, like privilege, is there another word that you think actually that has the opposite effect?
Was that to me? Sorry, or
Yeah,
Noora?
sorry to
Yeah,
you,
so
Mark.
to me,
Yeah.
sorry, I was waiting
And
for
we'll go
Noora
to
to
Noora. Because
yeah,
I know
okay.
we had this
Yeah.
conversation before, and I was like, oh, write that
Yeah.
down.
So I really, sorry, privilege really gets to me, and maybe it's because I'm so bloody privileged that I can't see it. Yeah. And Noora, maybe you'll come back to me and say that. I also, and I think coming back to some of the things that have been in the chat there, I think we need to stop using in most contexts men and women. and start talking about people. Yeah, because there was a comment there that men only become stay-at-home fathers when actually a lot of men want to become stay-at-home fathers. A lot of men that I've spoken to who are stay-at-home fathers love it. Yeah, let's start talking about people.
Thank you, Mark. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I want to open up the floor to some questions. Noora, what would you like to share, add to that?
I would like to share that actually calling it, naming it things is really important, using the language. I agree with Mark, just saying privilege is not going to work. But identifying what privilege it is we're talking about within that system is important. Is it able-bodied privilege? Is it class privilege? Is it education privilege? Is it race privilege? But what I worry is us moving away from not using the word. I would like to see people use the word, but with the right context to it. I think we need to make that extra effort. And that's where I think it's important to understand the system and understand what system gives you personally and disadvantages others. And the other thing I think we need to stop doing is that seeing this as a journey just as a training agenda. Enrolling people on a course, doing it as like a health and safety or data protection exercise online by yourself, it's not going to do anything. It really doesn't. We need to think this as more of a mindset shift, more of a mindset shift at conscious and unconscious level. I'm going to name check and say the other box training is something that it has just fascinated me, and it has done wonders for me personally, for the teams, for other organizations I've recommended. And it's also recognizing that we are at people are at different points in their journey, and finding that shift in terms of being able to go on the journey and just not, I agree with Mark, let's stop, making enemy narratives around, you're not doing it right. You're not getting the language right. Instead, yes, say you need to do a little bit more work and read on it. Sure, acknowledge it. But at the same time, systemic and overt direct is two different things. We uphold it by activities. That needs to stop. Yes, we all need to go on the journey, and we do need to call out when we see it. And I think, I really worry where the training agendas are leading organizations to. It's become a trendy thing.
Yeah.
But, it shouldn't be a trendy thing. It should be more fundamental and deep. The other thing is, I will just very quickly brief on, and I go on about this a lot, is that, again, going back to the word safe spaces. If we are going to have a group conversation about it, there is no way one person is not going to feel uncomfortable. Now, is that safe for that person? I don't know. One might feel safe to feel discomfort, but the other might not, because they might have, become an adult without ever having to experience that.
Yeah.
So again, brave spaces. Language-wise, men and women. I think it's good to speak about men and women in the context of what privilege we are speaking about, what advantage we're speaking about, what disadvantage we are speaking about, but not in the context of men versus women. Again, as Mark said, we are all people. We all have different privileges, and we all have different disadvantages. And the most important thing, I think, is we need to go beyond intent. We need to go beyond intent. Or everybody intends that, we all say, oh, I would love more people in STEM. I would love more people of color in climate sector, but I don't know what's happening. It just doesn't happen. No. You go and do the inner work, you break the barriers, you think about your bias, you learn, you grow, you break those barriers, and it will happen. So always asking, what is the impact? Let's not speak about inclusion as something that, is just about intention. And very quickly, Rhian, I know we're running out of time, but I want to say, let's stop making policies and procedures, the list Mark gave, is the first thing we do in organizations. Because when you make those processes and policies and things like that, without the people that you're trying to be inclusive of, you're creating additional barriers. You're creating additional barriers, you're upholding the system. To this day, you know, I'm always like, I'm not going to make that policy. I need the organization to be more diverse before we would write a policy or a statement.
Yeah.
Start with that. That's what I would say.
Brilliant.
Nora,
And
can I?
go
Yeah,
on.
can I pick up on that? Because there's something really fundamental that you talked about there, and you started off talking about training. I think, you know, businesses need to understand that this is the biggest transformational change project that they've ever undergone. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a huge project. Yeah,
Mhm.
what do they do about it? Diversity. Okay, let's set up a women's network. Let's write a few procedures. Let's write a few new policies. Let's put some measurements in place, and let's put all of those together once a year in our gender pay gap report. Yeah, and make them try and look like some kind of strategy, which clearly obviously isn't. You know, businesses need to recognize that this is a huge business opportunity for them, and they have a responsibility to take it seriously. If it was if they considered it as a transformational change project, what would it have? What are the elements that it would have? How would they manage
Absolutely.
it? What would the budget be? What would who would be involved? What skill sets would they need? Yeah, there's too many
Absolutely.
people trying to do this in a transactional way. Let's have unconscious bias training. Yep, tick, done that.
Done that.
It needs to be recognized that this is a transformation project, and it needs to have all of the characteristics of a transformation change project.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
that. And I know your organisation does some excellent training, which I'm definitely going to ask you to talk about in a sec. But I also wanted to acknowledge, for me, the similarities here with sustainability, because, you know, you started off now with this unique little unit, or maybe it's just one person holding the space for sustainability. And as the most recent ACRE Sustainability Salary Review reported at the start of this year, we're seeing sustainability being held right across organisational functions. And to me, as you said, Noora, that this is where we need to go with D, E, and I. It has to be integrated, and perhaps in different organisations, the holder for that might be in very different places. And for me, I guess this is the space I'm sitting in, is that we will not tackle this successfully if we don't achieve this equality, if we don't achieve this inclusivity and this shift, this mindset shift in the leadership, because we absolutely are not there yet, and we have to get this variety of intelligence and contribution, lived experience, and etc., in order to create the changes that we desperately need to see happen. I know this is the beginning of a conversation. Before, Mark, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about what you do. I'm going to wrap up with everybody, particularly Mark, how can people work with you? But I just wanted to go back to our lovely room here. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question of our two amazing speakers? We've got 5 minutes. It's been a fabulous conversation. I know we could go on for at least another hour. But is there a question? You can either put it in the chat or just raise a hand. And you're probably like me, just sort of mulling things over and just going, golly. So we certainly will be following up. But would anybody like to switch their cameras on, unmute themselves, and just ask a question? I know we've got a couple. Just checking to see if we've got any questions in the chat. Lots of observations. Anybody got a question? There was one right at the very start from Heather. Heather, would you like to just unmute yourself and ask Noora your question?
Yeah, I guess my question was about what are the nuances in, like you opened the conversation talking about the fact that we need to have a more nuanced view of things. And what are the nuances that you're particularly thinking about or that are top of mind at the moment?
Thank you. On a very sort of, on a macro, very grand level, I would say it's really looking at the system. That's the nuances that exist within the system, and the point that Mark made, that we all have different kinds of privileges, and when we say privilege in extract form, it's not really giving the message. when it comes to women, I think it's really important not to categorize all women specifically in one box. Able-bodied, invisible disabilities, children who are starting their menstruation, who are, sort of in the fertility period, going through menopause, single mothers, when we are in a relationship and when we are in a family unit, how a women's role changes. And, what does that mean? Why do we not have days off for the worst day of our period or menopause, just in a really nuanced way. And the other thing I would say is, just because we are women doesn't mean we all want the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Noora. Golly, Mark, I love your work. So could you just briefly share a little bit about what does Men for Inclusion do?
Thank you. Because this is the elevator pitch, isn't
It
it?
is.
Oh,
Get it
no.
right.
And I always
2
get it
minutes,
wrong.
1 minute.
I always get it wrong. So really simply, and put very simply, we help firms to engage the unengaged in DE&I activities. And we do that not through training, but through programs. So we have a methodology that we use called ADUCE, which makes and helps people become aware of the lived experience gap between men and women in the workplace. And there's a 30%, generally between a 20 and 30% poorer lived experience that you'll have in the workplace than me. We then move on to desire. What's in it for me? Why should I be involved? Why should I care? This is a zero-sum game, isn't it? Answering all those questions that we've talked about today. Helping them people build an understanding of what they can do about it, a capability. And this is all focused on inclusion. And then most importantly, and why it's not a training, it's a program, embedding. How do we embed this? So we, people that have gone through the program, senior leaders will help and support them to become role models. We'll hold them to account. We'll help them continue their learning. Or up and down the organization, we work with culture carriers. We train and support culture carriers to become disciples, if you like, to spread the word, to actively change and improve our cultures and our levels of inclusion, to ensure that your lived experience is not so dissimilar to mine.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for that. And thank you, Noora. Noora, I'm going to give you the last word, if that's all right. You can find Mark. Mark, would you put in the chat your details if you can before
LinkedIn,
we
yes.
sign off? Yes, thank you, so people can find you. Noora, if there was one thing, the second thing, because we've had your first thing, but anything as a final sort of thought on doing things differently, either at an individual level or if people are taking this as culture carriers, lovely phrase, Mark, into their organizations, what would you invite them to do differently?
Deep listening. Deep listening. And I'm going to add another word and actually steal it from Mark. We are all people.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Mark and Noora. You've had lots of appreciation in the comments there. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. I'm so glad Women's Sustainability has hosted this dialogue between us all. You've inspired me, Mark. I think we need to do more reaching out to men working in this space like you do, because I think we learn to collectively as people, we learn so much, don't we, when we come together to really unpack. One thing I feel I haven't really covered this session, which I was hoping would get there, but we have ran out of time, is how can we interweave sustainability with DE&I? Because to me, it's the same thing that we're trying to achieve. And is it through talking about transformational cultures? Is that the thing we need to come in under that will make the biggest difference? So I'll leave that as a thought piece or a little question mark for everybody on the call. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining me this lunchtime. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you both, Mark and Noora, and go into the rest of your day. I know from the comments, everybody's thinking a lot. They've got lots of things to mull over. So thank you so much, everybody, for making your time available to us. And I look forward to seeing you for another WIN session soon. Take care.